Yeah, hi. This is Tom Mayers. I'm just recording some stories that I have from when I was growing up here at around the Manatee River and the north end of Longboat Key. So I met a man named Asa Pillsbury. He used to come to our marina at Land's End, and he intrigued me, and he lived on an Indian mound, and he was a very old man when I met him. So here's the story. It's titled Asa Pillsbury. When I was a boy, Asa was an old man, 90 years old. Asa lived at the mouth of the Manatee River next to a big Indian mound that was named after him, Pillsbury Mound. Asa had been an important character in early Manatee County history. He was a boat builder, game warden. He was interested in history and botany, and Asa had a big mango grove that surrounded the Indian Mound. Asa lived there by himself in an old house that he probably had built. Asa would come to Land's End, our marina, and he had a charge account there. He never paid for anything at Land's End. He would come with his family members, usually by boat, and he was a friend of my father's, Frank Mayer's. Daddy would trade Asa hamburgers, cold drinks, beer, whatever he and his family wanted for mangoes when they were in season, and bamboo. Asa had probably 10 acres of mangoes and a big stand of giant bamboo at his homestead. We used the bamboo for decoration at Land's End, and we also used it for poling oars for boats and for other purposes. The mangoes we ate because they were good Hayden mangoes and some of the best mangoes in Manatee County. We would make a mango chutney from an old family recipe. We had always assumed that the recipe was from Barbados, but I found an old copy of the recipe handwritten with the name Hawaiian mango chutney on it on a piece of paper in one of the old cookbooks. No one really knows where the recipe was from, but we all agree it was excellent. It had just the right amount of ginger, bird peppers, green mangoes, along with other ingredients to make a perfect complement for fish or meat. We would preserve the chutney in jars and give it to people for presents. My mom would paint pictures with watercolors of scenes from Barbados on the chutney jars, and we always had jars of chutney around to give people for Christmas and other occasions. One Christmas vacation, we went to visit Asa Pillsbury, as was our custom. I was about 14 years old. My sister Joan had an old boyfriend visit from England that she had met on her trip there. He was an aristocrat and had studied archaeology in college. Nothing would do but that he would join us to see Asa Pillsbury and his Indian mound. It was New Year's Day, and my mother had made a big pot of Hoppin' John. Hoppin' John is an old southern dish, black-eyed peas and rice, that is a traditional dish eaten for good luck on New Year's Day. We had made a big bowl of Hoppin' John to take to Asa Pillsbury. On the visit, it was my father, Frank Mayers, the Englishman that was interested in archaeology, and myself. We got to the property. It was about 25-acre piece of property. We were met by a pack of big-headed dogs. I say big-headed dogs because I don't know what particular breed they were. They were just big-headed dogs like they use for hog hunting. Maybe they were curs, maybe they were pit bulls, maybe they were leopard curs, I don't know, but they were just big-headed dogs. This pack of about 10 dogs was intimidating, and most people would leave immediately on seeing a pack of aggressive dogs like that outside their car. But we knew Asa and knew those dogs were there to protect him. We just drove slowly down the drive, and there was Asa outside doing some work. Asa was a small man, and I don't know whether he was small because he was old or had just been shrunken from years of hard work and old age, or if was always small man. He was barefoot, never wore shoes, had a plaid shirt and a pair of khaki pants, and he was happy to see us meet him at his house. Asa had lived in that house for many years, and he lived there with his wife until she died. I'll always remember going to the house. In his kitchen, he had a calendar on the wall. The calendars were from the year that his wife died. I don't know when that was, but I think it was about 1945. It was strange for me, a young kid, to see these calendars on the wall that had been there since 1945. They had penciled in activities for each day, such as buying groceries or getting things for the boat, and they had just stopped when his wife died. I remember it as some kind of memorial to his wife, that at the moment that she had died, he stopped keeping track of time. When we were there, it was about 1965. For all those years, those calendars just hung on the wall. His house had fallen into disrepair. Asa had taken signs that had washed up on the beach and had taken those signs to repair the house. Some of the signs were big signs, like 4x6, and wherever there was a hole or a problem, he would just put a sign up and nail them into place. One sign might say Coca-Cola and another would advertise some real estate sale. It was a patchwork house. When we got there, we were introduced the aristocratic English archaeology student to Asa, and I had known Asa because my Cub Scout troop had been allowed to come to his Indian mound, and under his supervision we were allowed to pick up broken pieces of pottery that were laying around the bottom of the mound. Asa was a very kind person and allowed different groups to come and look at the Indian mound on his property, which is still considered one of the biggest Indian mounds in the Manatee County area. As we were talking to Asa and introducing the Englishman, I was told to take the Hoppin' John inside the house and put it on the kitchen table. That's when I saw the calendars on the wall. I came back out and we talked to Asa, who had been a boat builder and a sailor. When we tried to explain exactly who I was, my dad told Asa that I was John Savarese's great nephew. Asa got a light in his eyes and said, "Wait a minute, I have a trophy from a sailboat race that I want to give you." He said that John Savarese had won the race after Asa had, and that Asa still had the perpetual trophy in his house that really belonged to my great uncle. He went back in the house and he rummaged around for a few minutes, and the next thing you know, he came out with a sailboat trophy. Asa wanted to give the trophy to me because he was supposed to give it to my great uncle, but never got around to it. We told Asa that he had the trophy all those years and that he should just keep the trophy, and we gave the trophy back to him. As we were talking, there was a big commotion in the house. We heard a bowl break, and since I was the young kid, I was sent to the house to see what had happened. I went up the stairs and into the house, and when I got to the kitchen, there were dogs on the table, and there were dogs underneath the table, all eating Hoppin' John that we had left on the table for Asa. The dogs had hopped on the table, knocked the bowl off the table, and were eating it off the floor. I, with great distress, came out and said, "Asa, the dogs have eaten your Hoppin' John." The barefoot Asa looked at me and looked at us, and without showing emotion at all, said, "Well, I didn't have the Hoppin' John before you came, and I don't have it now." And somehow I took that as a lesson on how you get to be 90 years old. Losing the Hoppin' John didn't bother Asa a bit. There were all kinds of stories about Asa Pillsbury building boats when he was younger and working as a game warden for President Teddy Roosevelt, among other stories. There was a plumage trade back in the early 1900s. People would shoot birds for their feathers, and the feathers would be put on women's hats and sold in New York City and Paris. The beautiful bird populations, the egrets, the herons, the roseate spoonbills, were all being diminished because of the hunting trade for plumage. Asa was put in charge of managing a bird preserve over on Passage Key, just south of Egmont Key. When we would visit him, he had a boat, one of the prettiest skiffs I've ever seen, that was about 30 feet long. It was, in every sense of the word, a big skiff. It had a nice shape, was narrow, probably less than 8 feet wide, 30 feet long, and with a flat bottom and low freeboard. It looked like a giant little fishing skiff, much like the ones my dad had made at Land's End Marina for rental boats. When we talked to him about the skiff, he said that it was one of the fastest boats in Cortez in its day, and he had rescued it and was repairing it and was going to be his boat that he was going to fix up. He told me that he had used orange wood to replace the stem. While we were talking to Asa, he told us about the mangoes and different kinds of mangoes. He said that the mango trees he had were part of a horticultural experiment to see what kind of mangoes would grow this far north. He had a large variety of mangoes, probably covering 10 acres of land. Some of them were large, meaty mangoes, and some were smaller, very delicate tasting mangoes. I believe mangoes are from India and have a long history here, and the mangoes he had were a horticultural experiment to see if mangoes could be grown commercially this far north. If I'm correct, this grove is one of the only large mango groves this far north. North of Tampa Bay, mangoes don't grow very well because of the cold. I have 2 big mango trees outside my front door, and both of them I brought from Asa's property. They were given to me, and I planted them, and they have grown to tall trees. They went from being about 1 foot in diameter when I moved them to being about 2.5 feet in diameter now. They are full of good mangoes, and I hope to get a lot of good mangoes from them this year. If a hurricane doesn't knock them off or a squirrel doesn't eat them all. When we were talking to Asa, he told us some stories about his experiences. He told me one day he was out at Passage Key, and there had been a storm, and he had found signs of a shipwreck off Passage Key. He saw some boat ribs sticking out of the sand about 6 feet underwater. He said that he went home and got a long piece of metal rebar, a metal pole about 14 feet long, and he said that he went out there and started pounding it in the ground with a hammer around the ribs that he had found. By doing that carefully, he got the outline of a small shipwreck. He said that when he did it, that he had found what he thought was a box or treasure chest. He said that he had made plans to go out and find the treasure on the shipwreck, but before he could get back out there, a storm came through and hit the wreck. He looked up at me and he said, "It's still out there. It didn't go anywhere. It's just covered up, and I could find it again." After Asa died, I went to the property and talked to one of the family members who shot at me with a shotgun for trying to get on the property. After I had talked to him and told him that I was a friend of Asa's, he told me that he was going to destroy the boat that Asa was working on. I asked him if I could take the boat and have it because I was interested in boat building. I had a friend that had a construction business, and we took his bulldozer and a trailer, and in a matter of hours we put the boat on the trailer and we hauled it to my house at Land's End at the north end of Longboat Key. We took the boat and put it out between Land's End and the bridge, and in a short period of time it disintegrated because it was in the sun and not under a shed. I donated parts of the boat on loan to the Cortez Maritime Museum. They're still on display as exhibits of Asa Pillsbury's work as a boat builder. I did go there a few times and help Asa during the day. My dad would ask me to go and help him do some work. I don't remember much about it except that he had an old Model T car and an old tractor about the same vintage as the car. We spent time taking seaweed that he had piled up on the beach and dragged it up to the uplands and spread it out so that the rain could wash the salt off. He told me that after the salt was washed off by the rain, and it had been up there for several months, he would spread the seaweed around the mango trees for fertilizer. The trees were all planted in sugar sand, and I'm sure that the seaweed would help as mulch for the trees to grow. I'm telling this story about Asa was one of my fondest memories as a person. I had a man who had a great life. I was privileged to see him at the end of a long and interesting life. Tom Mayers, May 26, 2024. The USS Constitution Old Ironsides, as a combat vessel, carried 48,600 gallons of fresh water for a crew of 475 officers and men. This was sufficient to last 6 months of sustained operations at sea. She carried no evaporators or freshwater distillers. However, let it be noted that according to her ship's log on July 27, 1798, the USS Constitution sailed from Boston with a full complement of 475 officers and men, 48,600 gallons of water, 7,400 cannon shot, 11,600 pounds of black powder, and 79,400 gallons of rum. Her mission was to destroy and harass English shipping.